Cara Lai, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be back.
I can't wait to dive into this story. All right. Let me just start at a high level, which is why did you want to do a year-long silent meditation retreat solo?
I don't have a canned answer to this question, but other than I just really, really, really liked and felt a deep value in being on retreat. And every time I sat a retreat, the question came up for me, what if I did a year-long retreat? And it was just kind of like something that had been bumping around in my mind for long enough that I said it out loud to a friend at some point, and he was like, you should do that now. Because I was saying, I'm going to do it one day, maybe after I have kids and they grow up. And he was like, that's a terrible idea. You should not do that. You should do it now. And as soon as he said that, it just kind of clicked in my mind as something that I felt like was definitely going to happen. The original plan wasn't, though, to do it by myself. It was to do it at the Forest Refuge. But then the pandemic happened and it closed. The Forest Refuge closed. So I had to do it by myself, but I was excited about that aspect of it because I thought that it was going to give me this sense of freedom where nobody was going to be watching me and I could just, fart loud. And I talked about this in my first episode with you. It's like, just like be a mess and ugly, cry and be stinky. And so I guess it turned out to be something that I was happy it was going to be a solo endeavor in the end.
Let me jump in with a little bit of context here. You mentioned the Forest Refuge. That is a retreat center on the grounds of the Insight Meditation Society. IMS is a place listeners may have heard me talk about in the past. I sometimes semi-facetiously call it Dharma Disneyland, on the grounds of the Insight Meditation Society in central Massachusetts. They have the main retreat center. Then they have the Forest Refuge, which is kind of like pro level, where if you've done a sufficient number of retreats, you can qualify to go to the Forest Refuge, which is much less structured, and you can go for lengthy retreats there. And then there's also another center on the grounds where you can study Buddhism as it relates to meditation practice. So you were thinking you were going to go to the Forest Refuge, but then it shut down in the pandemic. And so you went to a place in Colorado that we're going to hear all about in a moment. But let me just go back to your why here. And to drop a little bit more context, you are, and I'm saying this semi-facetiously, like a professional meditator. You're a meditation teacher. Before that, you were working as a therapist. And I know it's important to you to point out that this is not something everybody has to do. You can meditate 5 minutes every other day at home and still be a perfectly good meditator. But for you as a teacher, somebody who has committed her life to the Dharma, a year-long retreat is actually not unusual. Many, if not most teachers have done a year and more.
Yeah. And but I wasn't even really thinking about it like that in terms of me as a teacher. It was more like practice has always just been about me really feeling deeply, deeply satisfied and intense inner growth from practicing like that. And so it wasn't so much driven by me being a teacher as it was just me feeling personally really fulfilled by doing a lot of practice.
I got home from my most recent meditation retreat. Actually, you were involved in my most recent meditation retreat.
I know.
I didn't know this was going to happen in advance. I was staying in what's called the Teacher Village, which is where teachers stay on the grounds of the Insight Meditation Society. Since I know the guy in charge, Joseph Goldstein, or he's one of the guys in charge, he lets me stay in the Teacher Village, so I get my own little cottage. You were in the cottages are kind of divided in two. each with their own like apartment. And you were in the other one, on the other side of the wall from me, which I didn't know, but was a very pleasant surprise. Not that we were chit chatting much, but it was just nice to know you were there. But I bring this up only because when I got home from it, Bianca was like listening to me complain a little bit about how hard retreat is for me. And she was like, why do you do this? And yeah, I had to think about that a little bit because I hear you talk about how satisfying retreat is for you. And yeah, I have moments of that. I've had probably some of the happiest moments of my entire life on meditation retreat, but much of it is a slog for me. And so I just say that just to see what it provokes from you in relation to why retreat has been so satisfying for you.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to say about this. And I think my relationship to meditation retreats has changed a lot over the course of my practice because it was more of a slog when I first started. And I was still experiencing these like extremely valuable transformations within myself as a result of them, which is what made me keep doing them. But my practice has gotten so much less intense, and there's just a lot less effort involved. And so even when it's really hard, it's not hard in the same way. You know, it's like I'm not adding to the pressure by pushing into it and blaming myself as much when it's hard. And that makes it so much easier when it is hard, you know, like, because what made it harder before was this idea that I had every time it was hard that it was my fault that it wasn't going well and that it was my responsibility to make it go better again. And that's one of the biggest insights actually that came out of my long retreat was just, I can put down this burden of needing to feel responsible for everything that I feel. And that's like such a deep relief, you know, and it's so much easier to practice like that. It's so much easier to be on retreat for as long as I want to be, you know, because it really feels like I want to be there.
That notion of not taking whatever you're feeling or thinking personally, and you know, so not feeling bad about it if you're feeling homicidal or whatever it is. I mean, that is one of the biggest benefits of meditation, and so that is huge. And I definitely have, like you, I've seen that capacity gets deeper if you go off to a place and meditation is all you're doing. I think for me, often it's like I really don't want to be there. And I need to like not get attached to that. I spend a lot of time like fantasizing about, missing my family and fantasizing about what it would be like to be back home right now instead of, you know, stuck in this grueling schedule of sitting meditation, walking meditation, sitting meditation, walking meditation all fucking day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's totally understandable. Actually, I think you said something to me in the like one exchange that we had when we were on retreat together about that, cuz my son Huck came to visit and we were kind of outside playing, you know, and I told you I was like we had to have this visit because it was a 2.5 week retreat for me and I couldn't be gone for that long from him. At least I couldn't like, I wouldn't have felt fully able to be present if I was gone for that long because of how bonded we are. So he joined me and I was like doing this kind of hybrid on retreat with him and being quiet and watching him play. And then you walked by and I told you, you were like, oh, so you're like teaching here? I was like, no, actually I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm on retreat right now. And you were like, wow, I really wish that I could have my family on retreat. And yeah, I was like, huh, because I hadn't actually thought about that. I was like, man, I wish I could just have an uninterrupted retreat. But I actually think that it did make the retreat so much easier for me to let go of the tightness around needing it to be like totally, you know, uninterrupted. and not have any, I was also checking my phone once in a while to make sure like no emergencies were happening with Huck, making sure he was okay. And so it was just relaxed a little bit more, and everything has had to be a little bit more relaxed since I did my year-long retreat, because I learned a lot of lessons, and we'll probably talk about that later, about how unhelpful it is to be intense with retreats. So maybe you should go on a retreat and have your family come visit you and see what that does. Because I mean, I also learned a bunch of stuff too that I could bring home with me, since my home was with me on retreat. You know what I mean?
Exactly. All right. Well, let's go to the year-long retreat. Enough dilly-dallying. So again, this is pre-Huck, pre-baby. Mm-hmm. And the first recording we have that I'm going to play here is from October 2020, and it's you talking to James, your partner, who's a lovely human being, I might add, a couple of days before your year-long retreat starts. Let's listen.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm scared.
What are you scared of?
I guess I'm scared of not doing it right. If that makes any sense.
So you're saying like a missed opportunity?
Yeah, that's part of what I'm scared of.
Well, what's the right way to do it?
I feel like I'm putting pressure on myself to I don't know, I guess like have this be the biggest, most life-changing, insightful experience of my life, and that I have to make it that way. I don't think I really realized that I felt that way until just now when I said that.
What if 1 year and 2 days from tomorrow you come out and you're like, oh my god, that fucking sucked. And he's like, oh my god, I have so much to talk about.
Why do I sound like a middle-aged man?
Because I'm approaching middle age right now. I don't know what to tell you. But what if you come out and you feel like, what if you're right?
I can't see that happening, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that if that was happening, then I would probably leave.
So that's on the table for you?
I guess I tell myself that it is. I try to tell myself that it is, but maybe part of me is kind of hell-bent on finishing it no matter what, because it's how I roll.
Were you right to be nervous?
Yeah. It was a really hard retreat, and way, 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 way harder than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. Like I basically did come out and was like, oh my God, that fucking sucked.
All right. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right. I probably asked the wrong question there, but okay. So a couple days after that, you fly to Colorado. Can you set the scene of the place where you're doing this retreat? Describe it for us.
Yeah. Well, we're already in Colorado because we were living there at the time. It was this, very remote part of Colorado. It was like southwest mountainy Colorado, where there's just like lots of dry mountains with beautiful trees. And, but it was like quite a drive to get to this place from where we were living in Durango. And it's this very small retreat center called Tara Mandala. And I think they have 5 or 6 of these cabins where you can go and do a retreat for as long as you want. And you're just by yourself, and you don't have to see anyone. They have this whole setup where every week you drop off a grocery list at the bottom of the hill, and they take it and then drop groceries off for you like a couple days later. So, I was in this cabin that had like a small solar panel for a small amount of electricity. I had a wood stove for my heat, so I had to chop my wood. There wasn't any running water, and the water all came from a catchment system. So the roof would drain into the gutter, and then I would have to filter it all. So it was pretty off the grid. And yeah, so I was living this kind of like solo, taking care of myself life.
No toilet?
Anyway, yeah. No, I just shit myself all the time. No, there was a outhouse that was like a walk, a short walk from my cabin. So
shared or your own?
It was my own. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it like when did you drive yourself there, or did James drop you off? And what was it like when you had to say goodbye?
Oh my God. Yeah. He dropped me off. He actually spent the night there with me, which was really sweet. He came the day before. He drove me the day before. We did a ceremony, like the Taramanda helped me facilitate an opening ceremony for myself in their meditation hall. And then James spent the night with me in my cabin and helped me get all set up there, cooked me breakfast the next morning. And then we had a tearful goodbye. Well, I cried. James was fine. And then I was alone for quite some time.
For many people listening to this may have never done a retreat before. So what do you do all day long?
I mean, the main thing is your main intention is to be mindful as much as possible. So like, I guess the ideal is to have continuous mindfulness through everything that you're doing, from brushing your teeth to doing sitting meditation to going to the bathroom to whatever else you find yourself up to when you're by yourself, which is many different things. So mostly I tried to find the activities that would support me in staying mindful as much as possible, which turned out to be a lot of lying down practice actually, and walking practice. But it was a hard retreat, and sitting was really painful for me. I was having a lot of pain in my body, physical discomfort, big time. So sitting actually was like very, very hard to sustain. So I had to just kind of like, and which was new for me. I had never experienced that before. It had always been easy. It had never been hard to sit or focus my mind, but I attribute it to the Lyme, as just my mind was foggy and unfocused, and my body was so hard to be in that the mind just would not stay put.
By the Lyme, you mean Lyme disease, but with which you'd been diagnosed several years prior.
Lyme disease, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was, in my head, it was not going to be an obstacle. When I started out, I was like, well, I mean, obviously I'll just be able to meditate and that'll make it better. And this, kind of for the first time ever was something that meditation could not conquer for me.
How soon into the retreat did you know this is going to be bumpy?
Well, I was in denial for like the first 5 months, I would say. I was like, well, as soon as this ends, then it'll be fine. And then I got to this point where I really had this idea that if I could just practice more continuously, then I would finally be able to get through it. And so I did whatever I could do to get more renunciative, if that's a word. I was like, okay, I'm not going to use this audio recorder anymore. I'm not going to like write letters to James. I'm not going to do anything besides formal practice unless I have to. And that was when I started crying every day. I cried every day for like at least a month, probably more than a month. And it was clear to me by the end of that month that that strategy was not a helpful strategy. And that, I think, was when I was like, okay, this is really hard. I need to change tactics.
Let me play a clip. This is from, and just to reset for everybody, the first clip we heard was from October 2020, as Cara's getting ready to go on this retreat. This next clip is from 4 months in, roughly, February 2021. So she's been on retreat for a while. Things are bumpy. Let's listen to this.
February 26th. I just, like, it kind of has been dawning on me this morning how much I've used concentration and meditation as a tool to deny a sense of care for myself and to not really acknowledge the pain that I'm in. But I couldn't tell the difference between when you're supposed to just work with something internally and when you're supposed to say, okay, there's really a problem here. And I couldn't tell because I feel like so much of the message that I was getting in the Dharma, which the Dharma was the thing, I was like, oh, this is going to fix all my problems. Meditation is going to heal me in every way. I don't have to do anything else. Just this. But that was actually avoiding a problem or making it so that I couldn't see that there was a problem. And there's a really difficult and painful problem. And it's not until now when I've been forced to stop accessing the ability to address it on a subtle level that I've really been able to care for myself and see how much pain I've been in. And when I found out that I had Lyme disease, I just cried, and I didn't really know why, but there was this part of myself that knew all along that there was a problem and that it wasn't okay. And the concentration and the subtlety was dismissing the pain I was in and preventing me from really having full compassion. And it was also making it so that I wasn't fully landing in just allowing what's happening to be happening, because I was always addressing something that was wrong with my concentration. I was into this thing of like, no, the only way I can feel better is to meditate. And now I can't do that anymore. And so I'm like, just, I'm really with the not knowing. I'm really with the having absolutely no control. And I'm really with the pain of that, like it's so hard to be in a body that gets sick and gets injured and gets old, and to not have control. And I never had to really be with that until now, because I don't have my tools. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. I don't feel like being with it helps at all. It just sometimes makes it worse. Usually it makes it worse. It always makes it worse right now, actually. So I just have to keep my eyes open and walk around and cry and hug the trees. And I'm so disappointed I'm so disappointed that I don't have control. You know, I came on this retreat because I was trying to help myself. I was trying to heal myself through meditation. And I thought I knew what I was doing. You know, I've done so much meditation. I feel like I'm pretty good at it at this point. But this is like nothing I've ever experienced before. The complete inability to concentrate after 5 months.
I really feel for you when I listen to this. I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to just start with a technical one, which is for people who haven't done a retreat or maybe don't have a ton of experience with meditation. You keep talking about concentration and subtlety and how in a meditation session characterized by a concentrated mind and the ability to see subtle phenomena arising, you generally felt better. But I'm not sure that's going to be intuitive to people. Like, how would being concentrated in meditation make you feel better in the face of whatever physical pain was arising from the Lyme disease?
Well, when your mind gets really subtle, things happen that don't happen in our normal way of experiencing life. You know, I mean, we start to see when our mind is concentrated that we can be with things that are normally quite intense or difficult or painful without having reactivity to them. And they start to become just, you know, what was once pain is now just sensation that's intense. And there's such deep comfort in seeing that I don't have to suffer when something is painful, you know, because when the reaction of the mind starts to settle when we're in a deeply concentrated state, there is not a reaction anymore. And it's just intense. Like, whoa, I can be with anything and it doesn't have to blow me around, you know? Plus, we can enter some pretty trippy and extremely satisfying and blissful states when we concentrate a lot. At least that's something that I've experienced in meditation before. It's like, oh, I can like almost like escape the regular world by focusing my mind and going to this altered state where I'm having like a full body orgasm. You know, maybe like part of me was like, I'll be having full body orgasms all the time on this year-long retreat because I'll have ample time to just get into concentrated states, like has happened before on other long retreats that I've been on. But this was not that kind of retreat for me. Does that sufficiently answer the question?
It's an excellent answer.
I like that we're getting technical right now because it's helping me cope with the fact that we are playing a very vulnerable clip for the whole world to hear.
Yeah. How is that for you?
It's intense. Yeah. It's really intense. And I mean, that was very raw for me. That was totally real. Yeah. And I was having an active insight while I was recording that about loss of control, you know, and it was like, maybe that's like the first time I've ever documented an insight in real time that I've had. And it's kind of cool. Like, oh, that's what insight is like. Not always, but sometimes insight is this like extremely deep disappointment and grieving the loss of control. And it letting go can really feel like that sometimes. Like, oh my God, I don't have control. Fuck. That sucks. But at the bottom of the grief is this freedom. You know, it's like, oh wait, I don't have to be in control. And that means it's not my fault when things are bad.
Just to provide a little bit more context on a technical tip, you're using words like insight and letting go. And So the kind of meditation that you practice and that I also practice at a JV level is often called insight meditation. I think in the ancient language of Pali, it's called vipassana, but we translate it as insight meditation. And the lay person's description of this, and I'll probably mangle this a little bit, is that you sit and watch the mind, and as the mind gets a little bit more concentrated, you get to see how the mind works, what this being alive thing is all about. And over time, you can have these very powerful insights into some basic fundamental laws of nature, of what it's like to be alive. And one of those insights, that's going to sound very obvious, is that things are moving so fast. You know, you're having thoughts, emotion, hearing something, tasting something, smelling something. It's all just moving so fast that you understand that it's all impermanence is so non-negotiable that it's all out of your control. There's nothing to do but to let go. And now that can sound kind of intuitive. I hope it sounds somewhat intuitive as I describe it, but an insight, which we just heard you have, is when it gets into your molecules and you really understand it. And that's what you very generously are letting us in on from your own practice. Am I restating all of that with some degree of accuracy?
Yeah. I think that's totally it. I think that particular insight didn't come from that kind of minutia that insight sometimes comes from, because like I said, I wasn't able to concentrate in the way that I normally can. It was coming more from a gross level, like I just don't have any control over my body feeling good. and yeah, it was almost like I just had a lot of experience of letting go and on that subtle level, but it was kind of time for me to have more on this real life, real world level or something. I don't know. That's an interpretation, but it might be, there might be some truth to it.
I mean, it must be so interesting for you having achieved the more rarefied states that are on offer in deep meditation, where you are letting go. In other words, you're seeing how quickly things arise, and you're seeing through the illusion that there's some core nugget of Cara behind your eyes, between your ears, who's in control of all of it, to whom it's all happening. And so you can have that experience on a fine or subtle level, but on a gross level, which is basically a Buddhist terminology for, the unconcentrated mind, the conventional mind that we're all living in. It's really hitting you in a way that it's never hit you before.
Yeah, I think that's right. Which, in my head, I really valued that type of insight when I was coming into the retreat, but I don't think I valued it in my heart. I was like, there's a part of me that really thought where the good stuff was only in deep states of concentration. But I was forced to not have any access to that and then be with it on this different level.
Sometimes when we surrender, I've had the experience, and again, my experiences are much less advanced level, but I've had the experience a few times of really letting go of striving to achieve a certain state. And then, something interesting will happen once you've surrendered. Is that what happened for you?
Yeah, I guess, but it wasn't pleasant. I mean, I guess what was interesting was just being in a state of confusion and profound despair for an extended period of time and not understanding why. And that was so unexpected. It was so unexpected, to the point where it was like, I kind of had to stop taking it personally, maybe this isn't about me, maybe this, I know this might sound kind of kooky, but I really had this clear sense that I wasn't doing this retreat for me. I was doing it for everybody. And the stuff that I was feeling, it wasn't mine. It was the world's stuff. You know, I was in these extremely long periods of time where I could just feel shame and anger. It was like I would wake up so angry and I would be on like a rant or a rage, like pacing around and screaming for the whole next 2 days. And then it would switch to shame and I would just be in like this deep, deep state of shame, which if you've ever hung out in shame, it's not a fun place to hang out in. But it didn't have any real strong story attached to it. It was just like the feeling of shame and like little nuggets of memories from my past that were just, they didn't really seem like they were cohesive in a story or anything like that. And I just had this clear sense that this wasn't about me. This is like, I mean, if we're going to talk about what's going on with the world, it's like, hey, shame and anger, that's pretty big. And maybe and at the very least, it helped me to think that I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing it for everybody. You know, like I went down into this place of unprocessed emotion so that I could process it for the world.
You wondered earlier whether that would sound kooky. It doesn't to me, for whatever that's worth. And it's bringing to mind a quote I once heard, and long-time listeners will have heard me say this many times, so I apologize, but a quote from some Buddhist monk who said that claiming your emotions or perceptions or sensations as yours is a misappropriation of public property.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really feel like I started to understand that more and more deeply the longer I was on this retreat, because it just, I mean, whether or not it's true, you can't really know, you know, that like you're processing something for the whole world, but you can tell that it actually feels deeply freeing to feel it that way. And so insight leads to the kind of release into this idea that it's not mine. It's not mine. It doesn't have to be mine. And also you do start to see like, it doesn't even make sense, like to think about it as mine. Now, like, what does that even mean that it's mine? Don't ask me to explain what I just said because it feels hard to explain that.
I'll spare you, but not too much
thanks.
because I'm going to take us 1 month later to another clip from you. This is March of 2021, and you're talking about 5 straight months of none of the cherished concentration. Let's take a listen.
So what I want people to know, whoever listens to this, is that if your meditations are really, really painful and difficult, it's not because you're bad at meditating. And it's not because you're doing something wrong. Because I think that what's happening for me is something that happens to a ton of people, but it doesn't get talked about nearly as much as the concentration stuff and the peace stuff and all the fun stuff. Because it's not fun to talk about. And people are embarrassed, so they don't talk about it. It brings up shame. It makes people feel like they're not good at meditating and they can't do it, and so they stop trying and they just walk away. But here I am, and I've done a ton of practice, and after more than a decade, it's 5 straight months of a complete inability to concentrate, and a completely, just extremely uncomfortable and just like, if this was what
meditation felt like when I first started practicing, I don't know if I would have kept doing it. I don't know. I don't know if I would have kept doing it.
I don't know if this is obviously just armchair quarterbacking here, but is part of what's going on here, and this may be just a statement of the blazingly obvious too, is part of what's going on here that you have this expectation of concentration and it's not happening and you can't let go of that?
Yeah. Wait. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is. That's just like kind of what the whole first half of the retreat was for me, was like not being able to let go of this idea of what I thought a meditation retreat should be. And in some ways that was like reinforced by some of the conversations because I was having some conversations with teachers, and I think that the territory I was in was very unique and rare, and my teachers didn't, generally speaking, have experience with the place that I was in, which just made me kind of feel like, well, I must be off the map. I must be off the map and it must be my fault. I did, however, talk to Temple Smith. I don't know if you know him, but he had actually, this is cool. He heard the podcast episode that I was in, the first one with you, where I talked about I was going to go on this retreat and I had Lyme disease, And he called me before I went on the retreat to be like, hey, I think we have some stuff in common, because he had chronic fatigue syndrome and went on this year-long retreat with it. And he had this experience, basically the same exact experience as me. But we had this conversation before I went on the retreat. So I was like, oh, that's too bad for you. And I went on the retreat and started to experience the same thing. And it didn't occur to me to call him until like around this time of this recording that you just played. And I called him and he was like, yup, I know exactly where you are. That's exactly how I felt. And you're just in a different ecosystem, like it's not the jungle, it's the desert, and you're looking for it to be the jungle. And it's just a different place. He didn't really give me like techniques, but that was good. I didn't need a technique. I wasn't trying to find, like, more techniques were just making me go crazy. I just needed someone to validate that where I was like in a real place, and that being there wasn't a place where practice was inaccessible or progress was inaccessible. And he totally validated that for me. He was like, yeah, this is part of practice. Like, you are doing a really deep practice that's going to be huge for you. And he turned out to be right.
I do feel like there's and I want to hear a lot about how he turned out to be right and what happened in the back half of this retreat. But this issue of expectation seems like one that's universal, important to all of us. That if you are walking around with expectations about how something should be, this moment, your relationships, your job, your birthday party, that's a setup for suffering, especially in meditation.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, this whole time I've been wondering if today is going to be like Judgment Day in Harrisburg, and we're like playing all these clips, and Dan's going to be like Judgy McJudgerson.
Why would you think?
But my
that?
expectations, because I'd like to set my expectations really low so that I can be pleasantly surprised when they get dashed.
I do the same thing. Totally. But that's like the reverse side of it, that the setting low expectations and then leaving lots of upside room for surprise. That, I completely buy that. But it's so much of my suffering on retreat and in life has been on the other side, because I'm beating myself up for not, getting back to some place, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. That's really where the suffering happens, is like we don't even realize that we have these expectations before they get challenged. And then we realized, oh, wow, I was really living this idea about how things were going to go or how things should be. And that's just not how they are. And so much of the time, insight and practice can be like getting all these expectations kind of dashed. And then, but, it sounds really disappointing at first, but when in real time, you really experience enough of that, it's quite freeing to live without expectations because you're really open to what could happen, and life becomes more interesting and mysterious and full of surprises and things that we think are going to be bad. We don't look at through a lens of fear. We just see, clarity and what could happen. You're like, wow, maybe this actually could be a good thing. Who knows?
The 10% Happier podcast is available ad-free over on our companion meditation app, which is also called 10% Happier. And you will get the episodes a week before everybody else does. Download the 10% Happier app right now to get started for free. So we've listened to some clips from February and March of 2021. There's another clip from July of 2021 that I want to play. It's a quick one, so let's listen to this one.
I wonder if whoever is listening to this is wondering if this retreat is going to have a happy ending or not. And that's the only reason that they're listening to the whole thing. Because I wonder that myself. And that's why I'm staying for the whole thing. It's a mystery. It's a cliffhanger. Who knows? It could all just fall apart. Or maybe that'd be good. Or it could all coalesce into a massive, extended, orgasmic release of bliss. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, we're gonna find out.
Okay, so let's find out now. That's July. You had started in October. Did it start to turn a corner at some point?
No. Which, in some ways, it's kind of oddly satisfying in its own way that it didn't. Because if it had, it would have just maintained this belief that I have that it has to go a certain way in order for it to have been a good retreat. And I got a lot out of the retreat. It just wasn't, I didn't have a moment like that, a moment of bliss. But I can say that I came away from the retreat with just huge amounts of compassion that I had never had before and this ability to touch suffering and have patience and be with suffering and understand the condition of the world and not want to escape it, and I think before I was using meditation to try to escape the world. And I don't want to use meditation to escape the world. I want to be fully human. I want to be completely alive. And I don't want to avoid other people's pain. I want to be able to be there for them. And I learned how to do that on this retreat without trying, just from living. I mean, part of what happened in the second half was just a real backing off. I totally backed off from practice. And I mean, not totally, I did do practice, but I just held the retreat so much more loosely and lightly. And it was really, I really want to thank Temple for a lot of his encouragement to this, because I wasn't giving myself permission, and I was constantly feeling guilty whenever I was doing something that was non-traditional, I don't know, drawing or even I had access to the internet, right? I had cell phone service at the top of my mountain. So he was like, you should feel free to research stuff about Lyme disease so that you can like figure out ways to address it while you're there, because that's what he had done when he was on his retreat. And it just really helped him to have something like that to do, you know, to actually address the problem. And man, that really felt like a mind fuck to me. It's like, whoa, I can be like on the internet on retreat. But I did need a release of some kind, and I needed to cope in whatever way I could. And so it was actually really helpful that he gave me that permission, because the pain wasn't really in like the pain wasn't from being distracted all the time. The pain was from beating myself up for distracting myself all the time.
This backing off that you're describing, this, you know, you spent months banging your head up against the wall, you know, expecting and beating yourself up for not achieving, quote unquote, and then you backed off. Have you been able to take that into the rest of your life?
Yeah, definitely. And I had to also, because it continued after the retreat was over, and I still was in my body. And so my body still felt like crap. And I had to keep being really gentle on myself. And just basically my mantra was like, just do what feels good, or just do what doesn't hurt. And there still hasn't been like a moment of complete release from that. I do feel much better now, which has happened over the course of a couple of years. But because maybe there wasn't like this sudden release from pain, I've really carried this looseness and lightness into my practice in a way that's been really beneficial. I still feel conflicted about it though at times, you know, just because it feels really non-traditional. You know, there's this real strong idea that we have in Buddhist tradition that if you're not renouncing and you're not going on retreats all the time and being really, really simple and giving everything up, then you're not really able to have insight and progress on your path. And that feels hard for me to shake, but I feel like I really want to shake that, because I can see the ways that it prevents a lot of people from even trying. Like this, if the idea is that you can't really practice unless you're on retreat all the time, or you're a monastic, or even just going on retreat once a year, which a lot of people can't, then people basically feel like they already failed. You know, it's like, oh, well, that's not my life. You know, I'm not going to be able to do that. And so I guess I shouldn't have like gotten this job that I feel really committed to, or I guess I shouldn't have had kids, or I guess I shouldn't have married this person who's not a practitioner. I kind of fucked up, but so I guess this path isn't for me. And so then there isn't an effort put in to practice. It's like, well, I'm not good enough, so I can never get anywhere. So I'm not even going to try. But I think if we changed the story that actually your life is exactly what you need to wake up and whatever circumstances you're in, that would totally be a game changer for a lot of people. And it makes a lot of sense too for that story to change, because the way it's set up really privileges wealthy people and men. You know, it's like, who can afford to go on retreats all the time? Not moms who don't have a lot of money, or aren't Dharma teachers. And even Dharma teachers who are moms have a hard time going on retreat all the time. I'm lucky. But yeah, like, so it just doesn't make any sense to me that should be the case, that the only people who get to wake up are the people who can go on retreat all the time. I think everyone gets to wake up. And the Buddha actually talked about how human birth is like the best, most optimal birth for awakening. You know, we have like the perfect blend of pleasure and pain. Not so much pleasure that you're like wallowing in pleasure all the time and just like having sex with beautiful people whenever you want. And then not so much pain that you're overwhelmed by it and consumed by it. It's a perfect balance. And so being born a human is extremely rare, and it's the optimal conditions to wake up. So I think it's kind of interesting to think like, wow, you were born a human, which is like, you know, only happens one in a bazillion lifetimes if you believe in multiple lifetimes. You have the perfect chance to awaken. Oh, and you're also into meditation, but because you can't go on retreats that much, you can't wake up. Sorry. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about that.
Agreed. And so what you're saying is that anybody listening, whether they've got a consistent meditation practice or not, there's still hope for us.
Yeah. And maybe even more than hope. Like, what if we flip it upside down, you know, and say that it's just a different kind of awakening from a retreat awakening. But what if it's exactly what you need to wake up, you know, that you don't need to go be a monk, but actually exactly the people and the circumstances in your life are exactly what's needed for your path.
And what do you mean by waking up, and how would we do it in our daily lives?
Oh my God, Dan, that's such a hard question. I don't know.
Who's being judgy now?
I guess in some senses, I could say something general about this. And I do think that it's, you know, each person has their own particular way that this might look, but it has something to do with letting go and letting go of clinging. And in enlightenment is often described as like the absence of something, you know, like the absence of, like the feeling you have when the buzzing of the refrigerator that you didn't realize was happening just stops. And there's this peace. Like, oh, I didn't even realize that there was this kind of anxiety that was running my life even. And as a result of seeing clearly into the true nature of things, as a result of seeing that all things are changing all the time and they're not personal, and there's no deep satisfaction I can find in anything in the material world. As a result of seeing into that, this letting go happens that is deeply peaceful. Like, oh, I don't have to try to grab onto anything anymore. I can just let go. Does that work as an answer to that question?
And how would we get a taste of that, you know, in a world of diapers and dishes and bosses and spouses and traffic?
Okay. I can tackle this. Well, okay. So as a mom now, I have really been excited to challenge the notion that like all these distractions and all this stuff to do is just in the way. Because if we're going to talk about, actually, Afosu Jones Corte, who was on this show recently, was someone who he and I, and also Jess Morey, we teach this parenting class together. And he said something that was so interesting to me. He was like, if we're going to talk about renunciation, think about parenthood. Like, my life is for you. And what does renunciation mean? You know, it's like I'm giving myself over to something. And in parenthood, in the case of parenthood, it's loving and helping and nurturing another human being. And so there's a way in which being a parent, at least, is like automatically a part of the path of letting go. It's like, oh, I'm giving myself over to you. And then I also have to let go of my agenda around my life and how my life needs to be. And I don't know about you, Dan, but my level of patience has grown a lot ever since becoming a parent. And my level of flexibility has grown a lot because it's not about me anymore. And if we see that interruptions can actually be an opportunity to let go instead of being something that's in our way, then we can use that as insight. And so that applies not to just parents, but anyone living in the world, which is full of interruptions and full of unexpected events and full of complex relationships and these things that we need to navigate that are full of opportunities to not have to have it be about us anymore.
Well said. That actually kind of brings me to, there are a couple more clips I want to play from the retreat. And this one actually goes right to this issue of, backing off or letting go or whatever you want to call it. This is from August of 2021. So we're really getting toward the end here. And it involves some hummingbirds who apparently you named after me and Jeff Warren, who was a meditation teacher. And so let's listen to this.
Jeff Warren and Dan Harris are out in the hail by themselves with no one to protect them. And they're just little. They're so little. I'm scared for them. I kind of want to go over there and put an umbrella above them. Oh, why does life have to be so hard? It's times like these that I feel lucky that I'm not a hummingbird. I'm thinking about how this whole retreat has felt kind of like why even bother? Why even bother? I don't see any progress. I don't see any results. It's just hard. But I also don't feel like there's any other choice. What else do I do? But actually today, I've felt lighter today than I have since I can't remember when. Since 3 years ago when I was on a 3-month retreat. And I felt okay. And it's because there's an acceptance that hasn't been there before. Like a really, really deep acceptance of discomfort and not grappling with it and just letting it be there. So it's not for nothing.
You know what I was thinking about when I was listening to that was that there are these famous recordings of old white guy journalists like Edward R. Murrow narrating what they're seeing during World War II. And, we, in our training as journalists, listen to these and, it's like the apex of journalistic achievement and courage. But I hear that echoes of that and maybe even a more hardcore version in these recordings of you. I mean, because you are going to a front line. It's just a little bit different from, Dresden.
Oh, I really appreciate that, Dan. And that is why I named that hummingbird after you. I appreciate you. Those hummingbirds were babies. Like I had put this little hummingbird feeder out on my porch. And they just started hanging out with me all the time, with tons of hummingbirds. And a mother hummingbird built a nest in front of my cabin and then laid 2 eggs. And what came out of the eggs were Jeff Warren and Dan Harris.
That clip really does seem, maybe, this is my interpretation, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but it does seem to get to kind of like, if not the bottom line, a bottom line of your learning during this year, which is acceptance. I mean, which is synonymous with letting go.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's so interesting because it was just not what I thought it would be. You know, I thought it would be this, I was so tangled in thinking that my freedom would mean the release of my physical suffering. And that just never came. But something else emerged, which was just this relief of having to feel responsible for it, you know, having to be at fault for it, being in charge of fixing it. I don't remember that day. I don't remember making that recording, but apparently that happened.
Yep. Unless it's a deep fake.
Right. Yeah, wow. It does feel though, like it feels like it's in my bones. You know, that retreat is like in my bones in this way that it's not like, it makes sense in some ways that I wouldn't remember stuff from that retreat. And because my mind was just like, I couldn't even think straight the whole year. And it was like the insight wasn't coming through my intellect. It was just coming into my bones.
It's such a courageous thing to do. Not only to do it, but also to make these recordings. Speaking of which, let me just play one last, which is October 2021. And this is you leaving.
Where to go?
I'm ready.
Tell me what you're talking about. It seems pretty peaceful here. See, but now this is where the hard part comes.
What?
Because now you gotta figure out what all of this meant.
I have to figure that out?
Mm-hmm. You gotta... What's the word? Process. To process it all.
Do you want any coffee?
No?
Water? The staircase is not up to code.
I know.
It's
Can
my
I look in
fault.
here?
Yeah. Other door.
Empty it looks. Did it feel this empty?
No, it was totally full of my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It felt homey.
Does it feel good and empty now? Does it feel good that it's empty?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of feelings about this day, weirdly.
Me either. Oh, perfect.
Really?
I felt a lot of pressure to feel a certain way about it, but I don't.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like I figured I'd get here. You'd be quiet. You'd cry a minute. Checks out, checks out, checks out. But yeah.
Yeah.
I feel relieved for you, is what I feel.
That it's over.
Yeah,
I feel relieved too.
yeah.
I don't feel amazing, but I don't feel depressed anymore.
No, that's good.
That's good.
'Cause I don't know if both of us can be all healthy all the time, and it's not gonna work.
Okay, so here's the ridiculously obvious question. Would you do it again?
Yeah. But I wouldn't do it alone again. That's clear to me, you know, that I really needed people, and at least in the state that I was in, you know, and I think that until I didn't have people around me anymore, I just thought they were annoying. But there's so much comfort just on a visceral level from being around other human beings. And even if we're not talking, there was something about not having them around that I felt the loss from that. And, yeah. So I would do it again, but it wouldn't be for a while. And it would be different, you know. I would do it again because I know it could never happen the same way twice. And also I probably would leave if it was too hard. Where I didn't leave that time because I just was like, I really wanted to know if something would change or if I'd miss it. And it was like my one chance to do it before having kids, if I had kids, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity. But yeah, I think I moved through a lot of pressures that I'd put on myself that I wouldn't have in the same way if I ever did it again. So I just would hold it a lot more lightly, and it wouldn't feel like the end all be all of my practice. Yeah, so I'd totally do it again.
Just to pick up on the thing about other people, I'll just run this by you because I'd be curious to see what you think. But my critique of the Western meditation scene is that retreats are, even when you're doing it with other people, it's a lonely business. Often you don't know the other people, and there's no real opportunity to interact with them because it's supposed to be silent. And you know, I'm not against the silence, but you know, I've had the good fortune to be able to do some retreats with friends just privately, which is not something most people get to do. So I recognize that this is not, that I'm very lucky. But in that model, which is kind of just something my friends and I are inventing as we do it, where there is a little bit of careful interaction, you know, we're not like, you know, texting memes to each other, but, you know, we listen to Dharma talks together and maybe have a little check in, and, the loneliness, I'm still lonely because I miss my family, but the loneliness quotient, the desperation that I often experience of being lonely, it just goes way down and allows my practice to go to a different level. So I don't know if any of that lands for you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we need ways to blunt the intensity of being confronted with the truth of reality. You know, there's just, not only are we actually setting ourselves up to feel lonely when we're on retreat, we're also facing these really harsh truths about how alone we are with our suffering in the world, and how, you know, we are the ones who have been tasked with, you know, finding freedom from suffering. And that doesn't have to be the case. You know, first of all, yeah, we can find ways to alleviate the intensity of that, but also, do we have to do it alone? You know, do we have to actually awaken by ourselves? That's, you know, that's such an individualistic minded way of viewing practice. And, you know, there's kind of like some of what I alluded to earlier in our conversations, like, this isn't about me. It's about all of us. So we got to do it together, you know, and we have to support each other in doing it. And we're biologically evolved to not be alone. So why contrive the situation that feels so unnatural and force ourselves into this box that why make it harder for ourselves? It doesn't have to be so hard. You should bring your wife and kid on retreat.
I'm open to it. We just have a few minutes left. Before I let you go, can you just tell, I suspect people are going to want to know, like, what are you up to? Like, what kind of teachings are you doing, programs are you running that people might be able to check out for themselves?
Well, I teach these drop-in classes online that are just donation based. One of them is called Meditate Your Face Off. And it's pretty fun. And then the other one is just a generosity class. So those meet like a few times a month usually, and anyone can come.
And you would learn about it on caralai.org?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's a third one, and that's the one I mentioned earlier. It's it's like a parenting, mindfulness and parenting class. And it's all about this, actually. It's like, how do you really be on the path when you don't have time to go on retreats, or your life is just full with parenting. And some people who come who aren't parents, they're just like trying to reparent themselves. So that's me and Ofosu and Jess Morey. I am involved in this contemplative semester program with with actually both of those two folks. And a couple other big names are joining us. Joseph and Sharon and Jeff Warren, I think, even is going to be involved. So it's a contemplative semester. It's like a 14-week in-person residential program in Vermont for young people. So it's like people who are taking like a gap semester, and it's for college credit. And there's tons of scholarship money available. So if money is an issue, that it won't be an issue. But it's like a deep dive into meditation and understanding Buddhist theory and practice. And we're going to do a few silent retreats throughout the semester and a lot of play too. We're going to have some dance parties. So community living, learning a lot about something that feels important for young people to learn about right now.
Oh, you have a podcast?
I do have a podcast. I forgot about my podcast. With those same people, I'm doing everything with Ofosu and Jess Morey. We have a parenting podcast. And it's called Adventures in Meditating for Parents. And you can find that through my website, but you can also find it wherever you get your podcasts. And that's a pretty fun time. If you want to get nerdy about Buddhism and parenting, that's the place to go.
Like I said,
I
I'll
sell
put links
t-shirts on my website.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I made these fun designs that actually you might appreciate, Dan. I fucking love mindfulness on a t-shirt.
Like I said, I'll put the links both to your podcast and to your website where you can sign up for those classes and buy those fucking t-shirts. I'll put those in the show notes. And just let me say in closing, thank you again for doing this. It's extremely courageous and incredibly interesting. So I appreciate you.
Thanks, Dan. It feels really satisfying for me to be able to document this with you. And, you know, it was a big deal what I went through. So it feels really helpful and useful to share it with you and the audience of this podcast. So hopefully someone finds it helpful. And one day I will write that book, My Year of Loudmouth Sounds.